At the time of this story, my wife was 27 and I was 35. We were married by our very own church pastor 6 years prior. Our parents raised us quite religiously, which is why we married so young. We waited to have sex until our wedding night. My wife was always involved with the church, so a lot of our bonding happened there. I would help her set up activities for the youth group, clean up the building, or run errands. Even though we were so young, we were committed for life. Our marriage made our parents happy, so we had their support. We were both each other's first and only lovers, so I thought our relationship was going great. I didn't have anything to compare it to. I asked her more often than not if I was living up to her expectations and if she was happy. She always said yes to both. One day, I saw her phone over her shoulder and she dropped it in a panic, breaking the screen. She blamed me for scaring her, but I think she was relieved I couldn't check her phone. I really thought I saw a chat I wasn't meant to see. I asked her what she was looking at, and she asked why that mattered. I knew she was stalling, so I asked again, and she just said she was texting a girl at church. After my wife's phone screen broke, she started going to church even more. I didn't always go with her because it was too much. Her phone was replaced, and the thought crossed my mind that she might have been messaging or seeing someone any chance she got, even if she was just in another room from me. At least the pastor was always in the church at the same time as her. He lived on the second floor with his wife. I knew he'd tell me if my wife was up to no good. After we got home from church on Sunday, my wife changed immediately. I went into the bathroom after her and just happened to see what she took off and threw on top of the dirty hamper. Let's just say I could tell they were marked in a way that didn't come from my wife directly. Comfort. I checked her worn dress too and found the same stains inside it. I confronted her about it, but she was just offended and wondered what exactly I thought she did. I couldn't bring myself to suggest out loud that she slept with someone at church. Even though she did leave me waiting in the car for her for over an hour, she claimed it was because she was catching up with Nancy, this old woman that didn't go to church that often. She continued going to church every Wednesday night and cleaning or taking care of things nearly every other day. I finally had enough, so I told her I wanted her to stay home. She refused. I didn't know how to handle this, because she was her own person and she was doing a good deed. I couldn't force her to stay home, so I was just upset and couldn't do anything about it. Everything changed when the pastor's wife called me one day. She was upset and told me she just found a receipt with my wife's name on it in the pocket of her husband's pants. Apparently, she treated him to a night out when they were supposed to be at the church. And in church, I'll panic as she freaked out and concluded they must be seeing each other behind our backs. She hoped they didn't have sex. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about my wife's suspicious undies and dress. We decided to let them go to Bible study that Wednesday so we could follow them. It was hard not to treat my wife differently. I looked at her with suspicion whenever she was on her phone. How could she act like everything was fine? I could feel the tension in the room, and it was all I could do not to burst. She didn't even notice. She didn't seem to care. After she took a huge bite at dinner, I asked to see her phone. She started coughing violently and took her phone off the table. After she recovered, she asked why. I said I just wanted to check it because there shouldn't be anything for her to hide. She told me it was dead and showed me the black screen. I said after it charged, she should let me unlock it. She was white as a ghost. What are the chances that as soon as she stood up from the table, her phone dropped on the floor and the screen shattered? That's exactly what happened. I just knew at this point that she did it on purpose. It got her out of trouble before, so it was the perfect plan now. Testers, I did my best to keep my cool until Wednesday night, when I met the pastor's wife at the church. It was getting late, and Bible study should have been over by now. We snuck into the church and found that room empty. We went down the hall, and the pastor's wife unlocked his office door with the spare key. There, in front of us, laid the pastor and my wife on a blanket spread on the floor of his office with no clothes on. I started snapping pictures on my phone while the pastor's wife ran down the hall screaming for the Lord to help her. She immediately called the prayer team and told them everything, begging them to come support her emotionally. My wife didn't have words for me. All she could say was how sorry she was. She asked me if we could go home to talk. I wasn't looking at her kindly. I felt like she was the worst person in the world. I told her she just broke me. She was holding my heart in her hands, and she crushed it. She was crying and seemed remorseful, but when I kept telling her how terrible she was, she got impatient and demanded to know if I was going to forgive her. I cursed at her and left the church. I still haven't gone back to this day and went to stay with my parents for about a year until our divorce was final. This word of the cheating pastor spread like wildfire until the whole town knew what they did. I'd say the consequences were equally bad for them. My wife was nicknamed Bathsheba, known as the homewrecker of the town, and the pastor was obviously disqualified to be a pastor anymore. For their lives were never the same, and they were far too embarrassed to continue seeing each other. They each moved back in with their parents. My wife only continued working at her job for a few more weeks until showing her face in public was too much for her to handle. After I moved back into the house, she started leaving me letters and voicemails. The only part I read was of the first letter, where she said her parents kicked her out. I just tore up the rest and deleted every single voicemail. I didn't want her in my life after what she did to me, and I was glad she couldn't go about her life without a clear conscience. I certainly hope you divorced your wife after this, and by the sounds of it, you did. You had proof of the affair because you thought smart and took pictures. She was a terrible, selfish woman, but enough to destroy 2 marriages. It's extremely embarrassing on the pastor's part to be caught up in an affair at the church in the same building as his home. Your wife became a temptress and he gave in. I'm so sorry you had to go through this shocking and uncalled for betrayal. After your parents raised you to be respectful and honorable, She cheated on you just 6 years into marriage. It's a shame this didn't turn out the way it should have. At least now you have another chance to find a woman that truly cares about you, shares your beliefs and values, and remains faithful. I wish you the best of luck and success in life. Thank you for sharing your story. Now, let's get into our second story for today. At the time of this tragic tale, I was 41 and my wife was 36. We had a teenage son who had lots of friends that we welcomed into our home. Even though our house got loud, it was full of love and acceptance for our boy and our boy's friends. One of them, named Jack, didn't have a great family life, so he spent extra time at our house. Sometimes we called him our second son, which makes the story all the more disturbing. My wife's hobby was writing erotica and romance stories online. She was good at it, and she had a really creative mind. Some of her writing even took a sci-fi turn to appease the nerds, male and female, in the audience. But sometimes her skill and creativity intimidated me, because I had trouble accepting myself and displaying confidence. I mostly felt stupid whenever I tried to roleplay or call her by some nickname. One day I came home to find Jack sitting on our couch with his arm around my wife. They were watching a television show on Netflix alone. I cleared my throat when I walked in and they both jumped up. Jack looked embarrassed. My wife just smiled awkwardly and greeted me. I asked where our son was, and she said he just left for the store to get a movie night snack. I asked why he went alone and looked at Jack. He stammered something I couldn't hear and went out the front door. My wife just shrugged and went to the kitchen to get a drink. I made a mental note to keep an eye on the two of them. I came home a little earlier than usual from work one day and found that the front door was bolt locked. It normally never was because it doesn't line up quite right, so it's hard to unlock. I worried that someone was trying to keep me out. When I finally got it open, my wife was just standing naked in the hallway and in a tempting pose, she was smiling mischievously. After we did it, our son barged in the front door. I had to lay low on top of my wife to hide and told him to head up to his room for a few minutes. He said, "Okay, but ask where Jack was." My wife replied that he wasn't there, but at the same time, Jack came out of the downstairs bathroom. He awkwardly rushed upstairs with our son. I looked at my wife, perplexed. Apologies to them, I asked why she said he wasn't here if he was in the bathroom and why she was there and looked ready to sleep with him. She was stumped and tried to tell me, unconvincingly, that she didn't know he was in there. I asked how that was possible and she didn't know what to say, so she said I was being silly and he probably slept over without us knowing. I let it go for a while. I wanted to trust my wife, and we'd been together for 18 years at this point. I continued sleeping over pretty often, but I paid more attention to when he did, so I could keep track of who was in the house. I also installed security cameras. I only got 2. One I planned to put on the back door and one in the hallway inside. My wife convinced me that our Ring doorbell didn't offer enough security because of the angle it was pointing. So, I put one camera on the front porch and one in the hallway. Our backyard was fenced in, so I wasn't as worried about that one. I could see anyone coming into the house from the hallway camera. At jerk receptions, while I was at work one day, the hallway camera notified me several times. I considered muting the notifications because I knew my wife was up and about in the house, doing her housewife tasks. Something told me to check it, and there was a major clue. First, I saw Jack going out the back door. This was odd because there was nothing to do back there, and if he was heading to his car, it would have been quicker to go out the front door. Then, sure enough, 5 minutes later, my wife went out the back door. My heart was pounding. I knew they were up to something they shouldn't be. I thought of how the front door was bolted the other day, how I kept finding them alone, and how sheepish Jack looked every time. 10 minutes later, they didn't even bother to hide the fact that they came in together. I just held open the door as if they both just happened to come in at the same time. They both had dirty knees. I went home immediately and showed her the video on my phone. I wasn't speaking kindly when I asked her what her explanation was. It felt like my world was ending. This was my son's friend. Not only would we divorce, but my son and Jack would never be the same. I told her that Jack looked to us for guidance, like parental figures. My wife started tearing up, but she said it was because she hated that I didn't believe her. She said she was telling the truth and had no reason to lie to me. Just then, our son stepped in from behind us. He told me he saw his mom and Jack having sex in the backyard. I freaked out. This moment was very traumatic. When it sunk in that her son just witnessed her infidelity with his best friend. My wife started wailing. Not only had he witnessed it, he just told me the truth. She got on her knees and clamped her hands together, pleading with me not to leave her. I felt completely numb, physically and mentally. I didn't know what to do with myself. Breathing was even a burden. I told her to leave, that I needed time to process what happened. I felt weak, like I might have forgiven her if I didn't tell her to leave. My son supported me, which made me upset and relieved at the same time. I was there when she had to call her parents to explain what was happening. And she just lost it when they told her she wasn't welcome at their home. They were so disappointed in her that they didn't want to help her evade consequences for this terrible, embarrassing choice she made. She screamed and threw her phone against the wall. The series, I let her sit on the floor and cry for a while before I nudged her with my foot and told her to get going. She was like a defeated zombie. She asked me where she was supposed to go, but I just told her it wasn't up to me. I knew she could go to one of her friends' houses as a last resort. She was just embarrassed. She messed up this bad. She didn't want me to divorce her, so she tried to make it seem like she had nowhere else to go. But eventually, she did leave without our son. All this time, I was out and didn't know I saw the footage of them coming back inside. When he returned, my son asked me to talk to him because he couldn't even look at him. I totally understood, so as hard as it was, I confronted Jack. I told him he and my son weren't going to be friends for a while because we both knew what he was doing with my wife. He was terrified, as any young man would be. He apologized to me, turned to heel, and ran. Like to our patients, I yelled after him, telling him not to sleep with anyone's wife ever again. I think he learned his lesson. I didn't care to know if my wife learned her lesson as long as she faced the consequences of her actions, and I know she has in this case. Our son hardly has a relationship with her now. He doesn't trust her and certainly doesn't want to date a woman like her. IDET. I'm so sorry your wife cheated on you with your son's best friend. After so many years of trust building, you count on your spouse to remain loyal and honest. It's never easy when a betrayal of this magnitude comes to light. It literally tears apart the family and rips away any security that was once had. Contrary to how it feels in that moment, the best choice is always to separate from the offender. Give yourself days, if not weeks, to think over this tragedy and decide how best to handle it. So much of the time, it's a better option to split, to avoid wasting time in a distrusting and guilt-filled relationship. Even the innocent spouse may start to feel guilty and ashamed. You did the right thing by splitting up with her and following through with divorce. I feel like this whole thing was worse for your son than it even had to be due to your wife's actions. Due to your wife's extreme carelessness and disrespect, she went to the only place without cameras, only to be caught by her own son. I wish you and him the best of luck and success in life. Take what you can from this and keep moving forward with hope for the future. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.